Episode 1 of the PDT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Smith, sports editor at the Daily Times. I was happy to be joined for the first episode by East coach and Wheelersburg grad Matt Miller. Miller was my first interview when I started with the Daily Times at a Portsmouth Post 23 Legion tournament at the VA in Chillicothe. During his 45-minute interview, we discussed his Lady Tartans getting their first win of the season this Saturday, his playing days as a Wheelersburg quarterback and pitcher, his coaching today at East, some of his more memorable players from Scioto County in baseball and football, and more. This is going to be a weekly podcast, so please subscribe, share with your friends, and send any suggestions to myself at the following email: jsmith@aimmediamidwest.com. Again, that's jsmith@aimmediamidwest.com. Let's get to the episode. If you're not already following us, here's how to do so. On Facebook, you can search Portsmouth Daily Times Sports. On Instagram and Twitter, you can follow @PDT Sports _. And on Twitter, you can follow myself @Jacob Smith, PDT, or Sports Reporter Paul Boggs @Boggs Sports. All right, welcome to the first episode of the PDT Sports Podcast. Happy to be joined with our first guest, East High School football coach, girls basketball coach, baseball coach, and an aide here at East, also GM of Portsmouth Post 23 Baseball, Coach Matt Miller. Welcome, Coach.
Thank you, Jacob. Nice to be here.
Besides what you're currently doing, let's do some biographical info for people that might be listening, people that might not know you, to help the listeners better know who you are. You're a 1992 Wheelersburg graduate, right?
That is correct.
Navy veteran. How long did you serve?
Just shy of 10 years.
When did you first start coaching?
Well, believe it or not, after I graduated, my first coaching experience, I was waiting. I didn't go. I graduated in May, and I didn't go in the military till December. So that football season, I coached a season of Pee Wee football with about 3 of my buddies or whatever. We got together and took a team, and we were all 18, 19, 20 years old, and took and coached the team then.
How about whenever you came back after your service?
When I come back, let's see, I got out in 2002. And honestly, I didn't start really coaching until, I'm trying to think, maybe 2011, 2010, somewhere like that. And it actually just kind of, I got back into Pee Wee football at Wheelersburg. A buddy of mine was the coach of one of the teams. He called me up one day. He's like, "Hey, I need help." He said, I can do the offense, or I can do the defense. He said, but no, I can't coach offense. I need you to come coach offense for me and teach these kids. He said, I could work with the line and everything else, but as far as coming up with plays, he said, that's not my forte. So I got into that and ended up coaching a total of 7 years. Wow, it might have been actually a little bit sooner than maybe 2009, 2010, but I got into it then, coached 7 years in the Pee Wee system at Wheelersburg altogether. And then, I'm trying to think, it was a group that graduated last year with Tanner Holden and all them. I coached a year Pee Wee basketball at the Berg, and then I coached all those boys starting in junior high baseball for 3 years.
Aside from all those things, I don't know if you remember this, but you were also my first interview whenever I first started this job. The Post 23 postseason tournament at the VA in Chillicothe a couple of years ago, a year and a half or so ago. Can't remember exactly what level of nervousness I was. It being my first actual day on the ground on the job. But I remember you being such a nice guy and understanding that was my first time on the job. So I was always just really appreciative of that. And it's, as we've worked together, especially over the last year and a half, it's been nice to know that, from the first time that we met, things have been well.
Right. Oh, absolutely. You did a fantastic job, by the way, first time. But I actually, now that you bring it back, I do remember it, or whatever. You're still going to school and had just hired in and everything, and you were a little bit nervous, but I didn't want to try to throw you off guard, but I thought you did a great job back then, and you continue to do a great job.
Well, I appreciate that. Another reason I wanted to have you on, especially as the first guest, girls team got their first win of the season this Saturday, 70-43. You guys made 8 threes. Casey Conley finishes with a season-high in points, 24 points, has a double-double with 15 rebounds. Grace Smith's season-high in points, while 9 girls scored. All 11 of your girls got in the game.
So I know, one thing we talked about afterward was that it's one win, and you guys had hoped that it would come a lot earlier. But how do you the way your girls played Saturday? How can that be carried over into the future?
I think it just gives them a lot of confidence. We've talked about all year of, basically changing the narrative. They were 1-22 last year. They were 0-23 the year before, and you can see a difference, and getting them to believe there was a difference. If you talk to, I'll tell you, and I appreciate this fact. The first message I had on my phone was from JD McKenzie out at Notre Dame telling me congratulations and it was awesome and everything. And I've talked to him and I've talked to other people and they're like, man, we can tell a difference in the girls. Just the structure, the way they're doing things, the way they're working. And for them to see it and for them to believe it, I think Saturday was a big step in that. Like I said, we had a rough go, start off 0-17. And we were in quite a few games. We just always had that part where, we go through a lull where we're hitting shots, and then for 4 or 5 minutes we're not hitting shots and we're not able to stop anybody either. So I think Saturday was a big confidence boost for him, and hopefully, over the next 4 regular season games plus in the tournament, builds a confidence not just for this year, but for next year going forward, because we're still pretty young.
Well, I was glad to be there Saturday, and I was glad to see them get their first win. It's a great group of girls, and I know how hard they worked to finally get the win under their belt. I know that was big for them. So
That's huge.
I know we mentioned off the top you're a 1992 Wheelersburg grad. You played football all 4 years while you were in high school. Was being a Pirate football player something you wanted to be and wanted to do growing up?
Absolutely. I know there's always, and I say this now, I'll always bleed orange and black. Now I bleed blue and gray too, because I've gotten so close here and I love the kids here and everything else. But, it was an experience in itself, just the structure, the way things are done. I mean, even when I was coaching in the Pee Wee system, I had access to everything with Rob and all them, would be on the sidelines, and, it's top to bottom from third grade all the way up. Everything's incorporated, and, it's the Berg way and about doing things the right way, having respect, working hard, because if you don't work hard, next man up. Somebody's going to take your spot. So I really appreciate the structure and the way things are done there, and even more so now looking back thinking, wow, I was part of that and helped build that foundation. It was a block in the foundation, I guess you could say, because I played on 4 really good teams up there. So it's an appreciation of the way things are done up there, and the history and everything else associated with it.
Your first 2 years, you were to start, you were a quarterback, right?
Yes.
First 2 years, you served as a backup. You guys win the state title in '89. You were the backup to another Matt Miller, who's currently the president of the Wheelersburg School Board. His daughter Libby graduated last year. Your son Matthew's on the Wheelersburg basketball and football team now. Was that confusing as it kind of is today, just from somebody coming from the outside in?
Well, it wasn't as confusing considering he's 6'6" and I'm 6 foot. But no, I mean, like my first 2 years when he was there, I went by Matthew, or some other names that people wanted to call me and stuff. The big thing, was Bud. But then my last 2 years, it was Bud or Matt or anything else. So, I mean, it wasn't confusing. It was very, to me, because I grew up, my dad coaching and everything. So, as far as I can remember, I wanted to be a quarterback at Wheelersburg. So, like, in the 3rd grade, I knew all the plays already. Get into 5th grade. I know the plays all the way up through. So, it was a pride thing of wanting to lead the Pirates. So as far as confusing and everything else, it might have been confusing if, we're blowing somebody out and then they say, now a quarterback, Matt Miller. And they're like, wait, he's still in at quarterback? But as far as everything else and learning from Matt and, all my coaches and everything through the years, I mean, it was like I said, it was a top-notch experience, something that'll live with me forever.
About the state title team, obviously you were a sophomore on that team. Any specific memories or emotions that stand out when you think about that team and being able to finally break through as a team?
Well, I mean, that was a trying, playoff run especially. That was when, week 10, was when Eric got hurt. And the thing I always remember from that was, we rode the Greyhound up there or whatever. We played up in Courthouse, and, Eric was my seat buddy. So, I communicated with him all the way up there and everything. And then for that to happen, it was kind of a solemn experience because we didn't know what was going to happen with him and everything else. And then, we wasn't the most talented team at all. Probably every team we beat in the playoffs was probably more talented than us. But cohesively, and the way it had been all year, cohesively, I mean, it was a brotherhood. It was a tight group, and after that happened with him, it was, we're not stopping until there's no more plays left in the season. We're going to take care of this for Eric. And that was kind of the mentality that came from it was, let's do this for Eric. Let's do this for Eric. People, players going up and spending hours with him after practice or whatever, and then driving back home and coming to school, and, coaches going up every night and visiting him. I mean, he was constantly on our mind. So I think it brought us closer together, and it's still a bond, today that exists. This past year was 30 years since we'd won it. So, I mean, it's still, I see him out in public, and, first thing we do is shake hands and hug and everything. And, sometimes we reminisce about the old days, but, mostly it's about catching up and maintaining those friendships.
Yeah, I found the Eric Wallace story very inspiring. I've read a lot about it just in doing research and getting ready for this. I guess it happened in week 10, like you said,
yes.
Just on a hit. He was your guys' honorable mention all-state running back, right? And it happened on a hit. Do you remember winning the game that it happened?
I want to say it was early third quarter, and he come up to make a tackle.
Okay.
He was playing corner. I do remember that. He was playing corner. I don't remember what half or anything else, but he was playing corner, and, he come up, make a tackle, dropped his head, and, come off the sidelines or whatever, and he just kind of collapsed on the sidelines, and so, but it was, that was a scary experience, I've seen injuries, like I said, growing up around my dad, I was always on the sidelines and everything else, and I've seen people get their bell rungs, and it's not like today, it's more prominent, keeping an eye on with concussions and everything else, but, usually back in the day, it was, all right, well, I'm good to go. I've sat out 2 or 3 plays, and, you were back in there. But, like I say, it was a scary incident, something that's kind of ingrained in your mind. But, luckily, he survived it, and, he's still around today, and, we can still associate with him and talk to him and see him and everything else. So.
That what you kind of touched on in the better part of the last decade, the 2010s, how much concussions and head injuries became such a prominent talking point or discussion point when talking about football, especially at the NFL level. And for that to happen to you guys 20 years before that, discussion even started taking place about, how safe actually is football whenever you're doing it, maybe without as much caution as teams are using today and as is used today in the game.
Well, I love football.
Sure.
If I didn't love it, I wouldn't be coaching. But, and it's different. I think personally, I think football is still a safe sport. You can get hurt doing, anything. tripping and falling and stuff like that and getting a head injury. So I don't necessarily, I mean, yeah, the risk is a little bit higher in football, but, the safety that's come along with it and, training the coaches to trying to understand, hey, this kid shouldn't be out there or whatever, or even first sign, like for us, if I think somebody took a hard hit and maybe got their bell rung a little bit, it's like, grab the trainer, it's like, hey, talk to him, see what's going on or whatever. I ain't going to put him back till you say, it's good. So the safety aspect has gotten better. The helmet quality has gotten better. I mean, the helmets we have now don't even compare to the foam padding that we used back when I played. So I think everything, the technical advances and the safety aspect has definitely increased from 30 years ago when I started, or even 10 years ago when I started coaching Pee Wee again.
You were a 2-year starter at Wheelersburg after the other Matt Miller graduated. Had a lot of success, including making the state semifinals as a senior in what happened to be Coach Miller's final game. Correct? Were you guys aware? Were you guys aware of that at the time, that win or lose last year, that Coach was going to hang it up?
Yeah, it was one of those things. I mean, he never really came out and said it at the time, but it was kind of understood, I guess you could say, that he knew the possibilities that we had. We ended up getting beaten in the state semifinals, I think 22-7. I think is what it was. Like Springfield Central Catholic's the one that beat us, and but after he didn't retire after we won the state, it was kind of like, okay, well, I know he's going to be here for my next 2 years, because we had a lot of sophomores that played the state championship season. I mean, you had two of the linebackers, Chris Kirkendall, Chris Ellis, were sophomores. Nate Kleiber was a sophomore starting at defensive tackle, and then actually after Eric had gotten hurt, he was starting at fullback. So, excuse me. And then we had a couple others, spot playing and stuff like that. So, we kind of had an idea, but, even without it wasn't well, let's not let this be the last one for Coach. It was, we've still got a goal. Our goal was to get back to the state and win the state, and that was our mindset. And once it was done, it was kind of, I can't remember, not too long after, we kind of find out for sure, this was it, or my last hurrah. But, like I said, it wasn't like it was something that it was, he didn't go on a retirement tour, before the season announced, like NBA players or pro baseball players, stuff like that. Because honestly, everybody wanted to beat us, so it wasn't like they were going to give him any gifts. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of understood, or the thought was there that this was going to be the last rodeo, because he believed in us winning the state, and so did we. So,
who were your biggest rivals at the time in football and in baseball?
Oh man. Baseball back in the day was always Valley. With Coach Schuler, and then they had Mike Crotty and Colgrove and Nurse, and I mean we always battled them, especially in the league. Like we went 23-3 my senior year in baseball. We split with them in the regular season, and then they beat us in the regionals. So they beat us two out of our 3 losses were against them. So baseball was definitely Valley. Back in that day, we didn't play Portsmouth. We played Memphis, and it's always a battle with Memphis. And of course, the West Side, the Berg, Portsmouth West rivalry is definitely strong. Same way with football. Waverly was really good back in the day. West was good. It seemed like every year in the playoffs we played Colgrove. I remember, when we used to go to West and they played. It's where the complex is at now. Was where their old school was and stuff. And we'd go up the hill, but we always had to wear full gear going there, because the bus was going to get rocks and everything else thrown at it. And as soon as the game was over, instead of going in and showering and everything, we loaded up and put our full gear back on to head back out. Police escorts all the time, and
So safe to say that the rivalries were maybe a little more intense then.
Oh yeah, they were definitely more intense. And not to say that like today, West doesn't have good teams and everything else, but like the intensity of everything was at an all-time high. I mean, like our junior year was when West, I think, went undefeated 10-0, and they had a really good team, and they put a 2-touchdown thumping on us or whatever, so we wasn't real happy with that. And I think the year we won the state, we might have beat them by 1 point maybe. I can't remember. I know we beat Waverly like 21-20 that year, the year we won the state. And, so the rivalries in the area, and even Memphis, like, we had tough games against them. It seemed like we always ended up pulling away late, but it was like a physical. I mean, they were all physical contests in the league. Didn't matter if the team had 0 wins. I mean, it was a battle each and every week.
Your senior season, your opening playoff game was versus East at Waverly.
Yes.
That's just 30 years ago. Both neighboring schools in the same division.
Yes.
Now we've got 7 divisions. Wheelersburg's in Division 5, East in Division 7. So that was just one of the also more interesting things that stuck out to me doing my research, that both schools were in the same division at the time.
I think we won 20-6, didn't we? I believe that was what the final score was. Is it in there?
For those not here with us, we've got newspaper clippings from from old Daily Times articles from when Coach Miller played. So we'll also be sharing those as we share the podcast.
Yeah, I don't remember that one, but I believe it's 26 because I remind Jimmy Bond. I've had his boy Chase the 4 years I've been here. Chase Bond's dad was on that team. He was a junior, I believe, that year. So I, occasionally nudge him and remind him that we beat him in the playoffs because that was the first year East had ever made the playoffs.
Oh, really?
Yes. So he's like, yeah. He'll be telling the boys, yeah, I was on the first team to ever make the playoffs. I said, who'd you lose to that year? He'd be like, shut up. But I have a great relationship with Jimmy and actually related to him because I'm related to his wife. So. And then his brother, Stacy, I played against him, and Guy Dempsey was a stud tailback. I mean, Guy had, 1,800 yards rushing that year.
Wow.
I mean, they had a very good team, and I think that year, like I say, we were in the same division, but I think we played more players than them, so we kind of wore them down. It might have been like 7-6 at halftime. Or something like that, and I think the second half we just kind of warmed down a little bit, where we played more players and they didn't play quite as many. And but I mean, it was a battle, and like you said, it's crazy to think that it is 30 years later, but there's 7 divisions now. If you look at Williamsburg's, they've got 200 and some kids in the high school, and we have barely over 100. But at one time we played, and back in the day they always played each other, so I mean, it's just crazy how things kind of come full circle as far as me being here coaching, but in the same sense I wouldn't have it any other way.
How else does football in the area change at the high school level?
Definitely more spread.
For sure.
I grew up in 3 yards in a cloud of dust. I think my senior year, counting the playoffs, so that would be 13 games, I threw 98 passes.
Wow.
But we also ran for, I had tailbacks that just, like my sophomore year, Chris Reisner was the tailback, and I think in the 4 playoff games he had close to 700 yards rushing. And then Pete Ruby, which is Lane Ruby's dad. He was my tailback my junior year, and I know Pete had 1,500 yards rushing. Wow. In my senior year I had Tate Cunningham, and he had 1,400 yards rushing, and my fullback had 1,000 yards rushing, and my wingback had 800 yards rushing, and this other wingback had 600 yards rushing.
Well, how much of that is the line, not your backs? No, I'm just kidding.
But it's true, though.
For
I
sure.
mean, even my 2 years, my center, my 2 years, his first 2 years of high school, he was a tight end. He was 6'4", 180, and he bulked himself up to get to about 220, 230. So, I mean, I can't complain. My center was like 220. My guards were both 200. I had one tackle that was 230, and I had another tackle that was 280. So, in this area, I mean, that was, and then my tight end was 210. You know, because we ran a tight end back then.
Of course.
So, I mean, that was, you know, you're looking at averaging between those six, averaging over 200 pounds on the line.
Wow. Was the expectation of winning at Wheelersburg in other sports even 30 years ago like it is today? I mean, last year was my first year in the job, and they won the SOC in volleyball, boys and girls soccer, football, boys and girls basketball, and softball. So, was that expectation still there at that time?
That is the first goal. I mean, first things first, win the league. You know, well, I take that back. It's maybe the second goal. The first things first is your goal is to win every game. You go 1 week at a time, you win every game. You know, and that's the only way you can play it. And then, you know, winning the league takes care of itself. And even like back when I played, only 4 teams made the playoffs.
Wow.
You know, so it was, you know, you play a regional semifinal game first week, regional final second week, and then state semis and state championship if you make it all that way. So only 4 teams, and it was, I mean, I played back, Clear Creek, which they're one of them in here. Like I said, Coal Grove 1 year. We played Warden Kennedy in the state finals. Springfield Central Catholic. I mean, it was very hard, you know, to make the playoffs. Like, to me now, I mean, it's still hard to make the playoffs because there's so many teams and everything else, and it is hard to make the playoffs. But it was easier than it was back then, to me.
Okay.
And even, you know, there's been a proposal out there of, hey, what do you think about expanding the playoffs to 12 teams, you know, per region? Nope, don't like it. It's already watered down. Last year, a team in our region would have been 3-7 and made the playoffs. That goes back to participation trophies, which I absolutely hate. You know, of, hey, you know, you might be 3-7, but you can make the playoffs because of your points. I mean, that's not rewarding, you know, however you want to say that. That's not rewarding having a good season, because no matter how you look at it, 3-7 is not a good season. You know, so I mean, that's, to me, it was tougher to make the playoffs back then, because even like this, like I said, that was the first year East had ever made the playoffs, right? Mm-hmm. Think of how small they were, yet they were still in our region, Wheelersburg,
right,
in our region, in our division, and beat 30 other teams in that region to make the playoffs.
Sure.
You know, going against a school that has 250, 280 kids when they have 100.
How much of a part of baseball? How much was baseball a part of your life growing up?
I believe from the time I could walk, so you're looking at a year and a half, maybe? Well, let's say a year old, I was on the baseball field. My dad coached. My dad, actually, when he graduated high school, he had a full scholarship to the University of Texas to go play for, his name Gustafson? Their legendary coach. I can't remember what his name was. And he turned it down because he had a job lined up at the steel mill when Detroit Steel was here.
Sure.
So he turned that down. So then, you know, he played Sunday ball with all the older guys, and then he started coaching. So a lot of the guys, you know, that were 14, 15 years old, older than me, or 13 years older even, still to this day, they were like, yeah, I remember you. You'd be out there and you'd just be, you were a bat boy and you were 3 years old. So, I mean, I was on a baseball field from the time I could walk.
Was being a fan of the Reds growing up in the late 80s, was that pretty fun? I would say. Pretty fun time to be a Reds fan.
Late 80s. Now you're dating me, Jacob. I mean, it was fun. The thing that sticks with me, like the Big Red Machine, which, that was when I was younger and stuff like that, 3, 4, 5 years old. The 80s, I remember I wanted to be Mario Soto, pitching for the Reds early 80s, mid 80s and stuff like that. So that's who I wanted to be. I wanted to pitch like him, so I wanted to be a pro baseball player. And then I went through a spell where I wanted to be a pro basketball player, and when you can't jump and, you're only 6 foot tall, that's not a good recipe to be a pro basketball player. But my love always growing up, I mean, I loved baseball, or I loved football and I loved basketball, but baseball was always my love. It was just something that, growing up watching the Reds every night, my grandmother, on my dad's side, either had the Reds on TV or the Reds on the radio. I mean, she never missed a broadcast, period. And she'd never played sports in her life, but she loved her Reds. So I grew up around that, and, like I said, my dad had a scholarship to go play college baseball, and both of my aunts on his sisters, 2 of my aunts, were very athletic and 1,000-point scorers at South Webster. And when I was little, my dad coached him in a travel softball thing, either fast pitch or slow pitch. So if I wasn't at the baseball field up at Willisburg, I was with them on the weekends, going to some softball tournament wherever and following them around. So, I mean, baseball's always been my love. And I mean, it's just something that, what was ingrained from me at a young age. And, I seen a video clip, and I've seen it on for like a year now or whatever, but it just reminded me the other day of, have you seen the video clip of the kid, like the 3-year-old kid or whatever, that has the sweetest swing ever?
I have not. I'm not.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to look that and tag you in it. This kid's swing is just, I mean, it's perfect. It's better than high school kids around here. I mean, this kid, and I mean, that's what I imagine. I mean, I grew up playing sports, playing ball, and I tell people now that my dad was hard on me. My dad was always my coach, and I'd go 3 for 4 with 3 doubles or whatever and 4 RBIs, and then he'd say, "What happened the time you got out?" And I'd be like, "What's the deal?"
That expectation was
there of, well, you had a bad at bat that time. You struck out, swung at one over your head. That was a terrible at bat. I don't care what you did the other 3 times. Those took care of themselves. But that at bat, it was a terrible at bat. You wasted an opportunity. So, I mean, that was something that, to me, I was always working, and striving perfection, which I know you're not going to be perfect, but always striving to be perfect.
I want to get into some general questions, also some coaching questions. Was coaching always something you wanted to do?
Yeah, I believe so. Besides being a pro athlete, it was something to me that even when I wasn't coaching, like with my son growing up and stuff like that, I would help him with stuff and, other kids on the team. And this is what solidified, I guess you could say, my love. I remember when my son was in Little League, and there was a kid on his team that had not even fouled off a pitch all year. And they were practicing one day, and I said, hey, I asked the coach, I said, can I work with him for a minute? I said, I think I figured out kind of what's going on. He said, yeah, go ahead. So I did some drills with him. I put the little thunder stick, the real thin ones, and made him hit marshmallows and, hit off the tees and do all this work. So he comes out the next game, and very first at bat, he gets up there to bat and he hits a home run. Wow. Had never fouled the ball off, had never touched the ball all year, hits a home run. Now, needless to say, after he hit the home run, he never touched the ball again because he was trying to hit a home run every time. But it was just one of those things I was like, man, that's why I love this. That's why I love this game. That's why I love, being able to pass knowledge because, I just made that kid's day. That's something he'll remember. I couldn't hit water if I fell out of a boat, but that one time I hit the ball and I hit a home run. So, that's something to me, even now, like Saturday is a perfect example. Like I said, we've preached and preached and preached, and my kids have worked so hard. And to finally see everything come together and their excitement and how happy they were, that just, for me, I've won games before as a coach, you know what I mean? But to see how excited they were and how thrilled they were and how much they enjoyed themselves, that's the best part about it.
You've been around high school sports for a while now, in this area, so I trust your opinion on these things. Who are some of the most talented or best football players from our area, the county, that you've seen?
Let's see. First and foremost for me, which I just saw him really his freshman year because I was away in the military, but Jonathan Eaton jumps out. Going up to Akron, being a captain, 4-year starter, having a tryout with the New York Jets, Jonathan was just an unreal athlete. And then you got to throw Trevin in there. Trevin, the things he did up at Michigan State, and honestly, to me, if he wouldn't hurt his leg again, he'd probably still be in the NFL playing. So those are two. A little bit when I was younger, Dave Piles played at Willisburg, went Miami of Ohio, played in the NFL, played in the USFL. The Parkers, Michael Parker, JoJo, even Talon has that ability. The Duncan boys from Portsmouth, Chris and Aaron both were amazing wide receivers. Michael Estep was a heck of a quarterback. He was a phenomenal baseball player, but he was a phenomenal quarterback for Portsmouth too. So, and you still have, you hear stories about, Larry Heisel and, all these other guys, which were before my time. But, as far as me, in my area, those are the guys that really stick out. And even, like I said, Guy Dempsey, had 1,800 yards rushing his senior year here at East. So, those are guys that really stick in around my time frame that, that I remember. And then, within the last few years, can't forget Tanner. Tanner is just, besides being he's a great young man. And I've coached him from 6th grade to his freshman year. I was lucky my first year getting back into football. When he was a 6th grader, he was my quarterback. So if the pass wasn't open, I just take off. And, he had plenty of 80-yard runs or 70-yard runs down the sideline where they couldn't catch him. What's his name? Man, I just drew a blank, and he is Bryson Williams. Quarterback, the 02 state championship runner-up for West. Mm-hmm. He's one of the offensive coaches at Willisburg now, but Bryson was a phenomenal athlete back in the day. So, there's been a lot of, and I think just because we're a small area and an underprivileged area and everything, people don't really look at the talent that comes out of here, but there's an enormous amount of talent in this area. and there has been in the past.
How about baseball? Most talented baseball players you've either gotten to coach with or coach against, or that you've just seen in your time?
My time around here, you got to start with Michael Estep. Went up to High State, started 3 years up there, part of 4 years really. And then, for him to come back to the area and to have the run he had at Willersburg, just the way he did things. And he did things like that, back when I played. I mean, I played against him and I played with him in Legion Ball. And just to watch him hit, I mean, I thought I could hit, but Michael he could put the ball anywhere he wanted to put it. A lot of his were opposite field, but that was by design. Left center field gap. He was a left-handed hitter, and he'd wear that, left center field gap out. And then, the one I played with, my best friend, Chris Ellis, he went to Ohio State, and I've seen Chris hit some balls, and it's just like, wow, just towering shots. Mike Karate from Valley. Mike was the same way. Like we were discussing before, I think Mike's still in the record book at Indiana for for home runs, for career home runs. Wow. And Mike probably would have been another one that had a chance to go to the pros too, but he hurt his back at Indiana. But I mean, even when I played Legion Ball, there was, in the 2 years I played, and even counting the year before me, probably 15 that went and played college baseball in that 3-year span. We had three that went to High State. Mike went to Indiana. Shane Sayers went to Memphis. 3 or 4, like Aaron Duncan and a couple others, went to Shawnee. Brian Wims went to Moorhead. I mean, we just had them. Johnny Hunt, went to OU, and I know he didn't ever make it to the majors, but then, but he made it to Triple A, I think, and left-hander threw about 94. Wow. The ball he didn't know where it was going, and you wasn't sure where it was going either. And Brett Roberts. I mean, I've known Brett a long time. Like I say, my dad graduated from Webster, so I grew up around all the Webster boys. And I remember when Brett was in high school, which I was in, junior high, 6th grade, stuff like that, I would sit behind the backstop. He's throwing 96 in high school. And just sit behind the backstop. It's like, oh my gosh, this is unreal. And he's 6'8", right. 6'8", 230. Throwing 98 in high school, or 96 in high school, and it was like, huh.
It's coming at you pretty fast.
Yeah. And then here I was in high school, and I topped out at 80, so, I had to find other ways. That's why Greg Maddox became my favorite pitcher growing up, was the way he moved the ball. He wasn't overpowering and everything else, but, And then even after I graduated, and I've known, Josh Newman since he was little, because I graduated with his brother. So, watching Josh grow up and going to Ohio State and playing and, getting drafted by Colorado and pitching for Colorado and Kansas City. I mean, that's a proud, thing where, I mean, even to this day, I could send Josh a message and, we just catch up and leave off where we left off the last time. So, recently, within the last how many years, Derek Moore. Mm-hmm. I mean, Derek was. I don't know how he didn't go to a bigger school, and I know it was because, well, he's only 87, 88 or whatever, but he could pitch. I mean, he was just.
There's more that goes into it than just the speed.
Yes, I mean, that's what all these bigger colleges looked at was, he's only high 80s or whatever. But if you're a lefty, that's fine. If you're a right-handed pitcher, that wasn't fine, And just the way he, worked the corners and his pitch selection and everything else. And, that to me what he did is so underrated. I mean, he was, what was it? What did it end up? 37-0 in high school?
I believe so.
So, I mean, it's like, how can you not, this kid, at the time, this kid is a winner. This kid knows what he's doing. How can you not be recruiting him to come be a part of it?
Yep. Well, Coach, I've taken enough of your time for
you're
today. I really appreciate you sitting down with me and discussing a lot of these things. Your girls play twice this week, right?
Yes.
At Northwest Wednesday, at Western Thursday. 2 long road trips for you guys.
Yes.
But a lot of time spent on the bus, I'm sure. But I really appreciate you sitting down with me and just helping me discuss local sports history.
Yeah, not a problem, Jake. I definitely appreciate you having me. It's, like you say, I'm honored to be your first guest because I think very highly of you, and I appreciate the fact that you asked me to be your first guest.
Yeah, and you go down in the history books as the first guest, so you'll always have that. Well, appreciate it, Coach.
No problem.